I want to welcome one of the best experimental music artists that I know of right now. So please help me welcome Tim Hecker. I wanted to just play a song to kick things off, to get everyone kind of in the same frame of mind. Those of you may know Tim's music, those of you may not. This track is called In the Fog 2.
I think you get the point.
So that song's called In the Fog, and in interviews in the past, you've mentioned fog. You perform, and there's fog in the room. What's the deal with fog?
Yeah, I'm like in a fog phase, I think, right now. That was like a reference, the title's a reference to a book in the 19th century that I came across about like English pea soup fog and these kind of mysteries that happened in the night. And I haven't heard that song for like 4 years, so it's kind of like a shock to listen to it. I probably would have mastered it a bit differently now. But yeah.
Why would you have done that differently?
I mean, there's like shrill sort of aspects around 2.5K that probably would have cut out. But yeah, it's definitely like fog based in some ways, like definitely just like kind of a continuation of my obsession with like ether and things that aren't fully formed or figurative or clear or kind of transparent or easy to understand. Like kind of almost shapeshifter kind of references and things like that.
Tonight you'll be performing in Montreal, and there'll be a bunch of fog, I assume, in the room.
I hope that like tonight will be the most fog like ever. So like this kind, there's different kinds of smoke machines, and tonight should be this kind that's like breathing like a waterfall. It's like beautiful liquid air, and you won't even notice that it's like so dense you can't see. That's the hope. It depends on like the air conditioning systems and the type of machines, but yeah, sometimes I do them quite intense. And
I was hearing you talking earlier today and yesterday about like you need to get the right fog. The right type of fog is so important. Like there's a fine line between good fog and bad fog.
Yeah, there's some that like literally, smells like chalk, and like you're basically inhaling like asbestos, and it's like the worst thing on earth. Others you like could stay there all day, and yeah, for me it's just a way of kind of cutting off the eyes in some ways. Even though I work with light, it's about channeling things back towards the primacy of the ear in these types of concert experiences. That there's so much audiovisual kind of like encouragement in our society and in arts institutions and festivals, that I think that there needs to be another path sometimes, which like brings things back to the ear, because how often do we just listen, and denying sight, denying, I haven't worked with screens for a while, as a way to kind of bring things back towards the ear.
I guess like a lot of performances you were already doing that sort of, even when it wasn't fog related. Like you played at Madison Square Garden behind a sheet, right?
Yeah, that was a requirement by Sigur Rós to kind of make the opener obfuscated. But for me, it was like perfect. Like who wouldn't want to play behind a gauze mesh thing at MSG and like play for like 15,000 people? Your little pipe organ dirge on your crappy keyboard. It sounded like insane, and was like the greatest way to be an exhibitionist, but also like not have that that weirdness of the silhouette of the lonely person playing on stage doing electronic music.
Was that the biggest show you've ever done, Madison Square Garden?
Yeah, of course. That's like literally the end game of all music expression. MSG, you're finished. It's like. So yeah.
Billy Joel and you, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know where you go from there, so it was like a real fun experience to like do this kind of crap in like a massive, massive sound system.
When were you doing that? Was that 2011?
Yeah, like 12 or 13. I can't remember exactly, but yeah.
So what have you done since then? Where did you take it?
In terms of my show, or was Sigur Rós opening for them?
Both?
I mean, I I've kind of like shifted in some ways. Like just I used to play in the dark as a way to kind of like make it about the heat coming out of a PA system in the night. Just kind of that feeling you get about just being pummeled and having that bass bin rocking, and like that's like a kind of really intense experience. And I've kind of still pursuing different ways to get at that feeling. And for me, I started smoking out rooms and having it dark. After a while, I started making these like static zones of just lavender. I have some jokes about what that color was. I can't really say now. But, it was this static, creepy lavender, like very like violator type of hues. And then I went to, I started working with a light artist, MFO, and we worked on these kind of like, I wouldn't call them Torellian, or I wouldn't call them like a bunch of different references in the visual arts world, but ways of making color experiences that do a similar thing to a full blackout in performance.
How do you discuss that sort of thing with someone like MFO or a collaborator who you may not speak the same language? Like, what types of things are you saying?
I mean, I triangulate a bunch of artistic references that for me are like clear, like, fog architecture, light installations that use fog, and a way that actually, like, it's difficult for light artists because I'm trying to create an anti-light effect. Often you'll have a light artist who has this like arsenal of lasers and strobes, and they want to just jack everything because it's like this performance that they can like enhance. But for me, I've been trying to say like, this is like almost needs to be understated. You almost have to make this like so boring, it's painful for you. And it's like a different way of like dealing with lighting. I think that, yields a different effect, and that's like partly the primacy of audio in the experience.
Yeah, I assume for the lighting guy, it's like, here's my shot. Like, here's my performance as much. I assume it isn't that way with MFO. But
yeah, it's a collaboration, and it's like a discussion about like, what kind of feeling do we want to make in this room tonight with this, combination of sight and sound. And for me, it's like, it's pretty specific, like a way in which you're not thinking about your phones, and like, you probably hopefully aren't talking about, like what bar you're going to, but you're being inundated with sound pressure that incapacitates your ability to think maybe about the tedium of your day, and you just like, your ego, like in the idealist state, your ego like evaporates, and like that doesn't happen, but like that would be nice. You can get to a point where the pressure is both intense enough that it doesn't kill you, doesn't hurt your ears, or just rides that line between violent confrontation and like almost comfort and like a womb-like type of surround environment.
I had the track that we played earlier, asked them to play it a little bit louder than maybe we would normally, just to get that point across of like physicality.
It sounded like bloated from here. There's like 2 bass pins, so it's like, it sounded crazy.
I think though, like I'm always intrigued by you and people like Ben Frost, where there is this physicality to the sound, when oftentimes other people with ambient music specifically, it's like you can push it to the background. With you, it's actually quite in your face oftentimes.
Yeah, I'm kind of like a bit middle path. Like, I'm not like a noise artist, and I don't claim to be doing extreme of anything or like really radical experimental work. Like, I think I pull back a little bit from that like point of ear damage, hopefully. But, I think that there's one step back gets to this really fruitful garden about like feeling threat, but hopefully not being killed by it, And that changes in every room, every space. I mean, a seated theater is different than a standing room, where people can move back if they're in some spot that they're just getting murdered. You can't do that when you're sitting in a opera house or whatever. Like, you're stuck. And so I tend to ease back a little bit out of sympathy for that.
You've done a lot of study, like in the academic field, on kind of loudness and pressure. Is that interest in terms of your live performance come with that, or had you always had that interest?
I mean, I kind of came out of like, as a period I was like really like playing with metal bands and like, more involved in like a noise scene than I am now. And I was into just like, taking a computer, which is really sterile, and running it through like distortion pedals and mono, and just like taking this like, pristine format and degrading it and using like sound pressure. And yeah, I've always been interested in like I would say like the transcendental aspects of sound intensity. So I went through a period where I like quit my job and studied and did a PhD, and I like researched the kind of historical origins of like people that were obsessed with loud sound, because there's a lot of books written about noise abatement, which is about people who were interested in making cities quieter, taking New York City in the Industrial Revolution and trying to reduce the sound of jackhammers and the time in which you can make noise. And so there's a lot of literature about people that were trying to like tidy up the city. And for me, that was like half the picture. Like, who are the people that were really obsessed with like powerful sound that could obliterate your ego, could make you dream about something else, could induce godlike effects through music. And that's a different thing. So I kind of went through a study period and read a lot and thought about it.
In your dissertation, at least one chapter is strictly devoted to organs.
Yeah, I wrote a chapter on this kind of like a sonic arms race where a small section of pipe organ builders in the early 20th century were, kind of fighting to build the world's loudest musical instrument. And that at that point was through pipe organs, which are using like jet turbine wind systems to create like really intense force. And that lasted for a short while because it was like kind of shrill and bombastic. And
you write quite a bit about this one guy, Robert Hope Jones is his name, I think. He seems like quite a character in all of this.
Yeah, he was like a dilettante, like a total outsider, like traveling around to different organ company builders before he got fired, trying to introduce this type of organ stop he built, which was like a 64 deep bass that could like, it was almost like sub-frequencies in 1914. And he would install these in the organs, and like they weren't church organs at that point. They were like secular. Cities and civic centers were building pipe organs. They were everywhere. It was like almost the form of musical entertainment at a period, at least in the States. The Rockefellers funded 8,000 pipe organs being built across the States.
And this guy was basically like, let's just build it bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah, he thought that you could like induce godlike effects through sonic intensity, more or less. So he tried to make them more powerful.
We have an image actually of kind of this. I guess it isn't one of his organs, but it's from Atlantic City. If you can put it up on the screen. Yeah,
it's one of his competitors that kind of ended up trumping him and trying to build the world's loudest pipe organ in Atlantic City. It's called the Atlantic City Convention Hall, and it's an organ with 33,000. So there's 33,000 pipes in this building. It's actually set into the walls, and that was the world's largest convention hall at that point. It's kind of insane because the place is falling apart. No one gives a shit about it. It's like the equivalent in terms of technology, like the Eiffel Tower in terms of mastery of like techniques at that point, but like no one cares, and it's literally falling into disrepair.
You visited some of the places as you were writing your dissertation. What was like, I guess the disrepair was one thing that stuck out to you, that no one cares about this stuff.
It's shocking. It's like really sad kind of, because it's like mostly elderly pensioners who are spending their time working for this, building, trying to help rebuild it, but they don't have the resources. Maybe that's changed in the past few years, but as of like 2013, it was like totally derelict.
What else, when you saw these things in person, like struck you about this?
So that track, Rave Death, kind of came out after just like traveling around and like visiting some pipe organs, and I got to do a tour of this one, and I played the organ because some of the parts of the organ still work, namely the deepest sub-bass notes that were like literally, they sound like you hit the lowest key, it sounds like a helicopter, just like air moving. It's like really intense, and it's like a gigantic room. it's like totally psychotic, and it was like really like hypnotic and almost like a narcotic effect. It was like quite amazing.
So you went to Iceland after that to record the album that you did?
Shortly after, like maybe a year or two, I went and took some pieces that I was working on at that point that were half finished, and my friend Ben Frost, who kind of encouraged doing this, and set up a church to just jam in, and we kind of just went over these pieces and played pipe organ with that, and I took microphones and fed that into my computer and did a lot of like processing on the fly, and we just recorded a bunch of stuff.
What was like surprising to you about working with pipe organ in terms of the sonics of it and dealing with the sound material?
I mean, I think what's interesting about it is kind of like what's like zeitgeist now is that it's just like the answer of like acoustic instrumentation and real representation with electronic processing is like some fruitful path that just for me has like no end of its like ways you can explore it, and confuse reality and representation and recording as this really documentary thing of just four people jamming in a room like it used to be, now to this like kind of dream state where you can do tableaus of deep imagination.
You mentioned jamming in a room and collaborating. For a long time in your career, you were like, no, this is me. I needed to get away from the band thing.
Yeah.
Like, what brought you back to collaboration?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of came out of music just like failed bands and like friends that were like too wasted and wouldn't show up the next day. And, I was just like, okay, like, fuck this. I'm buying a sampler and I'm going to loop you. And these were early computer kind of period, and I just realized I could like almost trigger like symphonic types of gestures through computers at that point, and it seemed clear to just like work alone. And at a certain point, I was kind of like against collaboration. I was like why would you share a canvas with four people? It's like that's absurd. I mean, some people do it, but most still, like, de facto, people do painting alone. And I was like, this is, like, my form of painting, so I'm just going to do this. After a while, it became, like, clear, once you bring other people in, and forms of collaboration can be really fruitful, and it's a different thing. Like, I'm not, like, doing band types of, writing at this point, but it still is, like, having other people involved is great, because you need a challenge function. If you're just sitting there alone, I mean, it's like you can easily lose yourself in like, plugins or like just clicking your mouse all day, and it's like can be deadening,
What do the collaborators that you work with, I assume you kind of have to brief them almost like, hey, what you're coming up with may not exactly sound like what you've done in this room right now.
Yeah, I kind of tell them it's like, hey, you're like feeding into something that will be not about what you're expressing right now. So that can be a whole bunch of different roles and ways to describe that. I've like pulled out an iPad with like paintings. I'm like, I want you to like create this drip effect through your clarinet, or we talked about this. I want you to pretend you're Chewbacca on Scissorp, and you're screaming through your saxophone, and like, what does that sound like? Let's try to do that,
Almost feels like you wouldn't have to affect that if they actually got Chewbacca on Scissorp.
I think I've like listened to a lot of like my dry recordings, and some of them are like really interesting and fruitful just to leave on their own. And I've done a record of that kind of stuff with piano, but I'm so used to just like processing and hammering and sculpting things into some disfigured state where the origin is confused. I used to just blanket everything with reverb and delay, and creating these kinds of like hypnotic, like post-minimalist states of repetition and vagueness. But I've lately come a lot closer to like semblance and figuration or something. I don't know.
Seems interesting. The way you talk about your music, you're constantly referencing art, like words. So sculpture, painting, figuration. Is that the way, I mean, that your brain has always worked in terms of thinking about the music that you make?
I mean, yes and no. Like, obviously, I come out of like a deep music practice. I played trumpet as a kid, and like I learned to do it from a traditional way. But like a lot of like epiphany moments was when I was thinking about painting and like, what is this like abstract squeegee painting sonified? Does it sound like crackling fire? Does it sound like some weird cut up collage, like sheared Picasso kind of face? Or is it a Xerox type of like form of granulation? And like that like kind of just pushes, like for me, like this light bulb in my brain and gets excited. And like then studio practice is really fun. And it's a way of just kind of like breaking through a wall, you know, in terms of writing, in terms of being inspired, you know.
Why don't we take a listen? I asked you to send me something that was just a bare recording yesterday.
Yeah, this one I realized is like stacked. It's 2 takes of Icelandic singers that I used on my last album. I used a lot of choir and wanted to just kind of deal with the voice because I was like really anti, not like rhythmic and vocal or traditional aspects, but like I wanted to deal with the voice in a way that would like was just interesting. It was a challenge for me to do that. So
listen to a minute of that, and then we'll listen just directly into the song that eventually emerged. So this is Music of the Air from Love Streams. So we kind of talked in very abstract terms about what happens between, you know, the dry thing and the finished product. Can you talk about it in concrete terms? What goes on in between those two things?
like how that happened.
Yeah.
So that there's an underlying bass note that starts with this kind of thing floating over it. That's something I like wrote and jammed in advance, just kind of like improvisation. And I got this, you know, short piece together, and then I sent that to Johan Johansson, who's a composer, does a lot of film and record work. And he wrote a short accompaniment for that. And that was a starting point for this studio session. He sent a conductor, his assistant, to come to Iceland, and we worked with an 8-person choral ensemble. And I was like quite hungover that morning. I was introduced to whale sashimi and ice cream, and I don't recommend those in a sequence. And like I stayed up all night, like literally felt like the worst I ever felt in my life. And that recording session was like only one day, and it had to happen, and I was like barely alive. And I was recording with Ben again in that session, and we kind of just took turns going into the room and giving them instructions like, okay, this sounds really beautiful and you're a trained singer, but what if you know, now have like some terminal disease and you are actually a robot? Or, you know, what if, you know, your voice can only sound like the most monotone thing? Here's auto-tune. What if you sing like auto-tune? Or like a bunch of different ways we asked them to improvise following the score that Johan gave me, but also alternate takes where they started just like singing off the things they were hearing. So we would play back the first take, which was probably the composed, arranged, official bit. And then we started asking them to do like bubbling sounds or like, you know, robotic burps, or whatever. And it started stacking up, and they started improvising off their own work. And, you know, by the 3rd or 4th take, you get these very strange things that sound like people breathing or gasping or asphyxiating. And I started to auto-tune that and, you know, treat it and mold it again with the original material, coming back to that bass jam I had at the beginning. And I just mixed a track down. And, you know, takes about 4 or 5 iterations, but becomes that in the end.
Auto-tune obviously is known for certain uses. you were obviously using for a completely different use. Why did you go to auto-tune as the thing for this?
I mean,
particular
auto-tune is
project?
just one of like probably 6 things in a chain of treatment that original material gets. But I mean, obviously, just the way of taking some variation and making it colder, making it less like expressive and exuberant drama student. Like someone talked about Lady Gaga as like being this like drama student who just couldn't stop doing like vocal gymnastics. And I was like, I wanted the opposite. I wanted like absolute muted, like weird synthetic restraint or something. And out of that, maybe some human aspect comes. I don't know, but it's like a different form of like, yeah, a deep restraint or something. I'm not sure.
Obviously, this record kind of had a very specific recording process. The organ one had like a thing. Is concept important to you before you go in? And
It's tough one because it's not like, you know, like all these records have these like strategic conceptual underpinnings. Like I don't map it out in advance, and I think it's not helpful to be just like pinned in by some map you set out for yourself that's like, I have this concept, I'm going to execute it fully. For me, I came at like I wanted to interrogate the voice. I thought about taking medieval choral music that I had ripped MP3s and turned them into MIDI files, and then started giving those towards, or applying them towards synthesizers and transforming them, and then they became back into the voice. So it was like almost an Ouroboros where a full cycle returned. But that concept kind of emerged as I worked, you know. Other times I've like kind of come at it from advance, but they're not all like watertight, you know, executions of some singular idea. I have a vague idea, but that clarity comes as you work through it. For me personally, other people like have, you know, the song in their head, absolutely. And, you know, like Michael Jackson, if anyone's ever heard his like 4-track recordings he did at home of Beat It, he just did, you know, just sang out every component in advance, and it's like uncanny and shocking that he visualized every aspect of that song. For me, it's like a bit of a more vague, impressionistic sense of where I want to go, and then it just kind of emerges through working and like hammering it into something else. There's a point we just leave it and it's done, and I don't know, you know.
do you come back to how do you know when it's done? Because I think this is the interesting question, especially with this type of music. It's like, I could keep going,
Yeah,
right?
we live in like an era of endless tinkering. Like you can have 400,000 revisions and save everyone and question every choice you make technically. And that can be great for some people. For me, it's like the worst thing on earth. So I know people who've been paralyzed by having too many options, too many like, you know, software synthesizers, too many presets, that you can literally spin your head out, and constructed limitation is good. And for me, I like to print when I jam or improvise to stereo files, just a single thing. I can't go back and question any mixing choice I made in that session. And then I build things on top of that. And it's not a normal way to work, but for me, it allows me to just move forward and not be, you know, stuck with this like infinitude of possible revisions and questioning.
Do you have a sounding board that you trust, that you're sending things to for like, hey, what do you think of this compared to this?
Yeah, like I have friends that are like the most valuable thing on earth. Their opinions, people who can be like frank with you, and that's like helpful beyond. And that's like really important. In the end, though, if you like solicit too much input, you can get the opposite, where you get this kind of like paralysis by democratic kind of like vagaries, because you'll find two of your friends will like things in a totally almost opposite way, and you realize, wow, it's like you're left on your own to just go with your heart. And you know, your heart is just kind of like in the end what you're left with, and you can't really teach like when to stop tinkering with things and when to realize a piece is done. But from my experience, I've just known when I start fidgeting with pieces, like the oxygen in the room of that piece just starts to dry up and it becomes like lifeless. Maybe I've heard it too many times and I'm sick of it, but I feel it just starts to get worse, you know?
In researching this, I was reading a AMA that you did on Reddit, and someone was like asking for advice, just general advice, and you said something to the effect of like, you know, if you work at it hard enough, you will find a sound or your sound. When did you find your sound yourself?
I mean, I had like numerous epiphany moments, but like one was like just taking like, I think I talked about distortion pedals, but just taking like a clinical sound out of an early software synthesizer in my computer and running it through a turbo rat distortion pedal, and then re-sampling it back into my computer and building something around that. And it just felt like, wow, you can literally just overdrive a crappy computer, pristine, full spectrum sound and degrade it. And it's like almost like a new form of, you know, 4-track or lo-fi, but for me opened up all these like spaces where I like realized, you know, that I could like work in and play in, and not like it's my own sound, but like there's something fruitful that starts to emerge after working like repeatedly and daily, you know.
Where were you at? Like, what year was this when this happened?
This was
speaking.
probably like 2001. I was making like, you know, minimal techno for a while under a label called Force Inc. And I switched to just doing music under my own name, and I started to just, overdrive pieces. And I released an album here on a label called Alienate, and also one on a German label called Mill Plateau, which was like a pretty cutting-edge digital music label around the late 90s, early 2000s. They were doing like glitch and clicks and cuts were kind of like, that was like almost like ground zero for a lot of these types of computer artists. And I kind of came at it from like a bit of a, maybe irreverent, like distorted, like, you know, Montreal really bohemian way. For me, I was around a bunch of like rockers and like a lot of DIY kind of punk music approaches that I like just felt that a lot of this clinical music I was associated with lacked like teeth and just needed a bit of dirt. That for me was like a kind of path to doing that.
For those who may not, you know, have been in Montreal at that time, can you kind of set the scene as far as, you know, what the scene was like for the music that you were doing and the people that you were hanging out with?
I mean, there was like a, you know, it was just kind of like an emerging hub of like pretty interesting electronic music where there's a lot of like connections with like Cologne record labels, Berlin record labels, Force Inc. and Compact and things like that. The festival here called Mutech, which is really like essential for pushing a lot of artists at that point. And then there was like, I lived in the Mile End, which was like where Constellation Records was operating, and I was like touring with bands like Godspeed, and I just had this kind of like synergy of like all these different really opposing aesthetic and musical kind of, you know, interests that kind of like confused me and led me towards a certain way, I guess.
We'll come back to the electronic stuff, but I find it interesting, you know, you talking about Godspeed and like that, those types of musicians, and you're out here hanging out with them, opening for them, playing with them, with this computer, when they seem, at least in my mind's eye, to be like very acoustic and very like, you know.
Yeah, they were like kind of amused by me because I would like play, you know, with the front of house engineer. I was interested in confusing the technician from the artist, like who's doing the PA's equalization, which for me is like an art form, and someone just running their music or playing a keyboard. And so I would like open for them and just play beside the front of house engineer, and just, it was like really liberating and fun, and people were confused because they thought it was like some extended, just, you know, walk-on music or something. They kept cheering like the band's gonna come on, and it's like, well, how about 45 minutes of this? And, you know, I don't know, I'd start doing, have stage lights going and there's no one there. And yeah, it was just a fun space of being able to confuse all these like performance gestures. And yeah.
What did the other bands make of you at that time?
I guess it was like kind of respect or appreciation because I was like asked to play with them. I don't know, you know. I felt like it was some weird synergy that like, it was weird. I was opening for bands like Godspeed or ISIS, these like, rock or metal effectively. You don't want to like pigeonhole them, but yeah, definitely from a different zone to what I was doing.
In the zone that you were doing stuff in, you mentioned Mutech, and I think that festival's impact on this city's electronic music scene is pretty undeniable.
Yeah, for sure. It was like this amazing kick in the ass because like if you're around your friends, you have a limited like standard which you have to like rise to. And for me, like I don't know if I opened for someone like Thomas Brinkman, but it's like someone you respect. It like forces you to kind of like raise your level, and that was for me was like crucial. Just being able to like be kicked in the ass to like think my music wasn't good enough or whatever. And those festivals were like almost this incubator of like raising your standards personally, artistically. They were like immensely helpful, I would say.
I think especially for like a city festival like that where the artists are kind of in the town during the day and like in the town for the weekend, it's also you're having conversations with them and like, what do you do with this stuff?
It's also like not like to be nostalgic because it's like whatever, it's like 12 years ago, but like someone playing on their laptop felt like insane. Like I was like, what? This is like you can do this now. It's like, and people were doing it just like mouse pad. And I was like, okay, this is like legitimate. And I started to realize this is a legitimate tool, and I felt like really stubbornly into it at that point when a lot of people were making like band recreations of their electronic compositions to, for me, create like almost a performative acceptance with an audience. I was really interested in like resolutely sticking with the computer as my instrument, and like why not like play a keyboard and a mixer and this weird hybrid to create a sound field that is like that has live components and is like improvisational, has risk, and is different each time. And that was like really great for me.
You've been a proponent of Max MSP almost throughout much of your career, right?
Yeah, I'm like an amateur user of it. Like I rely on like people that can program the patches, but like for me that's like still like an undisputably flexible, weird way to like treat music like a sculptural form, talking again about visual arts, like whatever, but it is like for me like a painter's workstation that I can kind of spread things around and treat digital audio like the cables, which is just data flows, as a stream you can capture and mold on the fly,
It's a particular, it's called Pool, I think?
Yeah.
What is that? Can you explain a little bit about?
PPOLL. It used to be LLOPP. It's a collection of all these patches it was developed primarily by, I believe, an Austrian gentleman, and it's chaotic, and all these objects are just Max objects, but they all connect in a network, so you can wire like all these things together and have them all modulate each other and talk to each other. It's kind of like modular synthesis, but it's it's computer, so you can just work with digital audio in a really fluid way, like treating it like a river that flows between all these different things. It's just a lot more flexible and open sourced, and there's a lot more possibility with making things that are kind of odd, I would say.
One of the things I found interesting, we were walking around yesterday, and you were just saying that you were trying to get rid of synthesizers throughout your career and try to like get less options in terms of maybe like hardware and things that you can do.
Yeah. I have a lot of friends that collect synths, and like I respect that fully. But for me, like I would say it gives me anxiety just like looking at like a room with like 15 synthesizers. So I was like, okay, I like to sell them and have just a couple and then be able to choose on that and like know them really well, but it seems like torture to have like 20 synths to choose from, and you have to plug them in, and it's like, so like, no, I'm like I have like a very low key studio process now.
What are the ones that you keep in there no matter what? What are the ones that you have found your way around and keep coming back to?
I would say like my bread and butter is like clavia-synths, like the Nord Modular is this like small, weird modular hardware synthesizer that I've used for like years and years. And I just bought another one in case like mine dies. I have like the backup, but it's, it's a really flexible, weird, early DSP type of synth that malfunctions in ways that for me are like really creative, and I can't predict how it's going to sound. Yeah, you have that. I just bought a Nord rack again because it's kind of like something I used to use and I'm getting back into. But that's about it, you know. I have an ARP Omni for sale if anyone wants to buy it.
What else
Please.
do you have in your studio?
Like, liberate it from me. Also, modular synth I use a little bit, but not that much. I find it's just difficult to kind of patch, and I get lazy with that. What else do I have in my studio? I mostly have like a really good mixing desk, and I have a bunch of guitar pedals, and I use things like 80s harmonizers, like Eventide effects, Lexicon effects. And I just route things to each other and do feedback loops. Like, it's almost going back to like the dub concept of just using the console as a, musical device and just feeding my computer into these kinds of weird ways that starts to just kind of become something else,
Have you used the same monitors, for your entire career? Do you care about that?
I've switched monitors, and that is like a disorientating feeling because you get used to a kind of sound, but you're also, every room resonates differently. So you just have to deal with that, and it's okay. But yeah, I do have a set of monitors I've mostly used.
What else inspiration, like on the walls? Obviously you're into painting and all these things. Like, I assume stuff on the walls would be...
Yeah, I have a couple things I keep hanging. I'm moving studios right now. Like, my studio's in a box, and so I'm like working on computer mobily. But like every time I set up a new studio, I hang this like painting of this snow leopard that was traced by my step grandfather, who was just like an asshole, and I don't know, something about it.
Won't go too deeply.
Yeah, this animal that just is like very strange because his like paw is really huge. It's like as big as a leg, and it's like beautifully disfigured. And then I have like a picture of Tupac on one side that just out of the side of his eyes he kind of stares at the monitors, and so that like helps mixing because you're just like he's like watching all the time. And you're like, am I going hard enough with this? Being too soft. And so, yeah, that helps a lot. And
what
then
would
there's
Tupac do?
Yeah, I don't know if Tupac would make the kind of music I do, but it's just like he's a kind of spirit companion, and he's just always sitting there. I have a couple dolls of like Sandinistas that I got. No, not Sandinistas, but from Chiapas in Mexico. These like revolutionary dolls I bought when I was like traveling through in the 90s, just after the kind of insurrection there. And I have a painting or a picture of like vintage era Federer, just kind of doing like
Roger Federer.
Yeah, just a little tennis. That's it.
What's the Federer significance?
I just think it's like gracefully poetic in his like apex, because now it's like over and he's like pretty much retired. But like, at his like peak, he is just like it was like very compelling. I don't know. It's like graceful and like murderous, like a ninja coming into the night. But like the tennis version, I don't know.
The tennis ninja.
I'm like not into tennis as much as I used to. It's like kind of the golden era is like over now. And it's just, that's finished, so.
R.I.P. golden era of tennis.
Yeah, finished.
In terms of process, what about like naming files? Are you very like precise? Is it take one, take two, and has the date in it? Are you more like this is what it feels like? It's
like stream of consciousness poetry. I just kind of like name at that moment, and sometimes it's just like dates and a weird feeling. But
Give us an example of stream of consciousness.
Yeah, just like I'd write something like Jaw Bells version 5, max shred or something, 2, January 3rd. So it's like a bit of context. And then from there, I start working on the pieces. And then at the end of when I have an album, I start like naming them. And I do a kind of like almost a Ouija board seance where I just kind of like it's like for me a chance to do poetry. Like literally, I love writing, and Album naming was this kind of like opportunity to just like add a bit of oblique poetics to the object called the music release, whatever you want to call it. I was kind of opposed also to like, or interested by artists like Autechre who were like, it's all pointless. Let's just randomize these crap titles and just, make it computer generated, which I really was, compelled by, and I was like always thinking about. But ultimately I fell against that, or I felt like, something else, like a chance to like write something. And
definitely puts you in a frame of mind, when you open up the album and like hit play and you have this picture.
When a track's called XXCB fold_7, it's like, what's that make you feel, right off the bat when you hit play, it's kind of like odd. It gives you a disorientating feeling, which I think is part of their artistic intention, fully. And that leads the music almost being formed right off the bat.
I think one of the things that I've always enjoyed is the sense of humor in the track titles. Like, 'cause certainly early on, there was a lot of just like wordplay.
This stuff seems so serious, but it's like it's not like fully this like really austere, bothered like type of expression. And like for me, there's like a lot of jokes that underlie a lot of this music. Like when I did a collaborative record with Daniel Lopatin, we were laughing the whole time, and that album, even though it was made in 2 days, was just seeped with humor. And it was like, it doesn't translate in a clear way, but it's underneath the surface and all this. And yeah.
Why don't we take a listen to one of the tracks, actually, from that one. What do we have here? This is Grey Geisha. You made that album in 2 days, and you said you didn't even basically remember making that track when it started, at least.
I haven't listened to that song since it was like mixed down, like not at all. It's like, for me, it's quite like funny. Like I remember making a joke about like that song or that like motif being like some idea of the intrepid North American traveler who like gets inspired by like world music or like Andean pipe flutes or something, and just not sarcastic, but like just some weird hybrid fiction. I don't know. It came out of a joke basically, then became musical expression very, very quick.
With that one, a lot of people, when they hear it, I think they might be like, I can hear Tim Hecker in here, and I can hear OPN, and I know exactly who did what. Was that the case actually in the studio?
No, not at all. Like sometimes we reversed. Like I would play more the leads. Sometimes he would play like he'd bring his Juno out, but it was like a mix. Like definitely there's certain times like our roles were like clear, and we pulled out the instruments we know and just like tried to make music. The whole point was to have a break from this like almost suffocating document called the solo album that it was like so much pressure and scrutiny that we just wanted to make something really quick and like in the spirit of jazz. Not that like we have the chops of jazz artists in terms of our instruments, but we do with like computers or with like working like quickly with digital audio as like a performative form of expression for sure.
You recently signed a 4AD for this last album. You're talking about this solo album and the dreariness of it.
It's not dreary. It's just intense and takes a lot of work. And that's not to say it's like shitty or like really depressing. It's not. Like I love making music, and it's like a great blessing to be able to do it. But it takes a lot of work.
Did you feel more pressure, more expectations, anything different with this new album being on a different label?
No, not at all, because I wrote it before it's out, where it would be put out was clear, and I just did it, for myself, and it's like the same thing I've been doing for a long time. I've always like not taking music as like this career path where like I need to, do it a certain way so I can sell records or get shows. I just tried to just do it to satisfy like my soul or my spirit or my need to fill a hole in the world of music that's not, being made, or just making peace with yourself ultimately. And hopefully everything else will come from that.
I know you haven't been doing it consciously, but do you think your music has been getting more and more accessible with each passing album?
I think it's like difficult to say. Like it's hard for me because like I don't want to listen to my old catalog. I don't want to know what I made in 2008. Like I want to forget about that. And obviously we return to some of our same gestures and tropes and harmonic movements that you feel like spiritually connected with. But I don't know. That's a tough question. I think that there's something like peaceful that comes with time after you've made like how much distortion can you make? How overloaded can you make something until it's like pointless? Like, so you made like something really heavy. Okay, so what do you do from that? Make your next record like even heavier. For me, that was a point where I was like kind of joking that there's an arms race where it goes nowhere. And you need to like go sideways. And I don't know if that means more accessible. I don't think so. It may be, but I feel like it doesn't really matter. Like that debate or question's not that fruitful.
Another debate I think that's kind of over in a way that you were kind of touching on earlier is people using laptops to make music. Like back a while ago, sort of like, whoa, this is crazy. Is this a thing? Now that it is a thing, like, what does that mean for your own music practice where originally you were thinking like, wow, this is like super punk in a way?
Yeah, there's a point where it was this punk thing, almost not punk, but it was like a little bit confrontational. And then it became really passe in like the mid 2000s. And I like stuck with it. I started wearing this costume. I wore this dungeon master outfit, and I had lighting people trigger these lightning effects. And I would drag like one leg onto stage with a cooler of beer and then would play my music. And I would just keep doing it. I didn't form a band, which, is fine, but it just wasn't my thing. And I feel like I do use musicians occasionally for sure. And it's something I'll probably come back to, I think, because it's fun to have someone to like improvise against. I've done a few concerts in this past year where I've used singers walking around in fogged out spaces with wireless headsets, singing motifs that are similar to some of these pieces. And they would just kind of like wander amongst the crowd, and it would confuse like what's happening, because you could hear someone sing and then, but it's also being affected through this huge PA, and the performative apparatus wasn't clear, and I really liked that personally.
I think also when you worked with Unsound, you did something with someone who makes perfumes.
Yeah, it kind of like part of this, the way I've been working has been like really encouraged through like working with them by, doing something that was light and sound. I had been working with like light and fog for a while, but we kind of made something a bit more jacked up where it was also perfume, like an almost aromatized scent being diffused in the room. So it was like sight, sound, and scent.
So what does Tim Hecker's scent smell like?
Unwashed hippie. 2 weeks on the road with the Grateful Dead. Patchouli and incense. No, I don't know. Something, maybe. No, I'm not sure.
One of the things that you've kind of always talked about, and I wanted to touch on, everyone kind of listens to your music and says, wow, this guy must be just horribly sad and depressed. And, you meet you and you're just like...
Just crying.
Yeah.
You met me I was in just a puddle of tears before I had to come on and do this. I was like literally...
It was difficult for us to get him here.
I think...
It's actually the opposite.
I think it's just like, it doesn't really matter, personality. Like, it's like I'm making work. I don't think that same standard of personality is held to painters. Like, who cares, It's like kind of obscene, the amount of focus on biography that musicians are forced upon, you know, like the narrative of your relationship breaking up, informing the sad songs you make. I mean, who cares? In the end, you know, it's like it should weigh less. For me personally, that's why I don't make it such a big thing, or I'm reticent sometimes to be more involved in the visibility of the product or the object that I'm making.
Wanted to maybe open it up to questions from the audience. I'm sure some of the participants have a question or two.
Hey, thanks for coming. I really wanted to ask you, so you kind of covered ambient scene back then, 2001. Can you tell us a bit, few good names in Canadian ambient noise music from nowadays?
I mean, I think like there wasn't really an ambient scene. Like I also feel like I don't do ambient, or I don't really try to defend that as like something. I was kind of like confrontational ambient. Like I wanted like these kinds of quiet room environments jacked up on steroids that would like blow down your wall, you know? So it's like, how am I like defending ambient? I think it's fine. I definitely am drawn to a lot of like, whatever you want to call, you know, classical works in ambient music, but I have like a problematic relationship with it because I also want to antagonize it quite a bit. But there's lots of great musicians in this city and in Canada. It's like kind of insane. There's a website, or used to be called Weird Canada, that has like an endless assortment of, you know, from tape artists all the way up to, you know, more established, you know. There's a history that goes back to like Lanois and beyond, doing this type of work. Like new age musicians, endless, you know.
One of the artists that you've worked with quite a bit is, I believe, Canadian, is Carolise Coverdale.
Yeah.
And she'll be playing tonight. Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about your work with her and her work in general?
I met her like 4 years ago, maybe. She was working with a friend of mine, and I just kind of like brought her in and started jamming with her. And she was making music herself, and we just kind of had like Le Patin, just a funny back and forth where I'd have her just respond to things I was making, and I would process them on the spot, and just kind of like keep stacking things and shifting them and having her respond almost like in terms of counterpoint to some of the work that was like coming out of the speakers. And yeah, it's like...
What is it about her work that was so intriguing to you in the first place?
She's like a highly trained keyboardist to start with. She knows like music theory deeply, where I'm more of a dilettante that like has a loose understanding. And she's very expressive in terms of keyboard, and literally like very simple, like one note and major chords that are fairly rudimentary. Yeah.
Is there any other questions?
Yes. Hey, thanks for coming. Getting deep here for a second, you spoke a bit about certain music and volume as having a godlike effect. Can you explain some more about that?
No, its promise is godlike effect, so it doesn't deliver that. Like it's accepting that it's a failure, but there has been people for 100+ years who have felt that as like pipe organs were in the church traditionally, it could invoke God. Okay, so once organs shifted to a secular type of context, increasingly in civic spaces where people go out to concerts that were playing more nationalist anthems or whatever, that it could still invoke some transcendental effect. I don't try to invoke God at all. I like sometimes playing churches, and I definitely toy with religious form, but it's not to reaffirm any form of transcendence or promise in it, but it's almost like to gut it and to create some kind of like empty husk of a dancing promise of God or something. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Interesting.
I think churches, too, are just, like, acoustically fascinating, right? And they're, like, very specific type of place.
I, love the reverb in them. It's just that relationship with God is problematic. And so I prefer secular, I prefer black box rooms. Like, this room's great with, like, quad system, just creating a very danger zone of white heat in the middle is perfect.
Sure. Just a second. My heart is pounding. I have a bunch of questions, so Can I find you afterwards, maybe?
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Okay,
Absolutely.
so one of them could be because we through the last couple of days had a lot of talk about. There's been some talk about tuning and frequencies and healing in music, the effect on the human body. I know Carsten Nicolai and Alvanoto, he has researched a bit about frequencies and the human body.
Like the 430 hertz versus 440?
Yeah, something like that, yeah. Have you any thoughts, or can you talk about like music? Is it relative to subjects? Is there something about frequencies? Can it be destructive? Can it be healing? How do you feel about all these kinds of...
I'm like deep in that kind of question right now, just researching my next record, just in terms of tuning. Like I'm using a lot of instruments that traditionally were made at 430 hertz, which just don't work with stock computer plugins and synths because they're all tuned up. So there's a lot of internet kind of corners of the world that believe that 430 hertz is like more biological and more healing and resonate with like biorhythms of the human heart and spirit. And I'm like really interested in that. I'm not sure I believe it yet, but I'm kind of like in that wormhole myself. And I think that it's a really interesting question, like why are things standardized with this, Western equal temperament intonation at 440 hertz? What happens when you detune everything, and the relationships, like going back to Pythagorean tuning, I've used quite a bit. It gives you a different feeling when you hit a chord where things are just like aligned in like a ratio that's better than a purely mathematical division of 12. I don't know what the answer is, but I'm deeply confused and interested myself.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, just quickly want to ask something about what he just said, because I was talking to another participant.
We can
And
talk
sorry, I'm
about
not a
430 truthers now.
I think it might be 432.
Yeah.
Not trying to. No, I'm not trying to diss
it's okay.
you. But
teach me, please.
well,
Like you had to learn.
just in the context of you talking about, playing in holy spaces, using instruments like pipe organs to invoke God or whatever. I think. Sorry, now I'm getting a little heartbeaty. More about the concept of controlling people through using certain frequencies, and how people in the church did that it's like part of it was invoking the spirit, but it was also a form of controlling people.
Yeah, for me, control is not a word I want to use myself in my own practice. So it's like I'm talking about that like historically, like it's almost like baiting people into, certain like situations with certain tonal relationships or chords with church music. I mean, I'm interested in like creating a special experience for people, or like possibly, hopefully, some form of transcendental moment for a second, but not controlling, because like that's like so loaded with like power relations and things that I'm not really interested in. I feel like if someone doesn't like it, they can leave, and I encourage like 20% of the audience to leave, because there should be a portion that doesn't like it. It should be confrontational, and it shouldn't be for everybody. And I think that control's like a weird one. It makes me feel kind of strange.
Yeah, I guess I was just thinking about kind of the relationship there between something like 432 seems like it's the natural, the natural harmonic tone, and that things got moved to 440 and kind of standardized in that, and those tones are like, to me, oddly, a little too bright, a little oppressive, and used in a lot of Western culture, and just hearing how that small shift coming out of something too religious and something that's supposed to be so holy and spiritual, and also it's just like an interesting.
Yeah,
it's hard for me to explain.
Once you go down to 432 and you detune things, it feels a bit looser and like slower and like resonates a bit better. And when you turn up the 440, it feels cracked out. It feels like really, really juiced and bright and kind of like almost neurotic. And I agree. I'm not sure though. Like I've made so much music in 440 that, but I also de-pitch everything I work with. Like I have everything not in perfect tune with each other. I mean, we haven't really talked about, making music with like modern tools of like perfect metronomic, locked, like asphyxiating, like repetition, that everything is in perfect time. The same thing with tune. Like I really enjoy having things drop out of tune with each other, so that there's some kind of like phase relationship and time relationship that's not like predictable 4-bar loops or patterns that are just like, okay, yeah, you're just looping two things in Ableton or whatever. Yeah.
How do you get out of those locking mechanisms and the grid, so to speak?
I mean, you just have to use like different ways of turning those things off and like using longer form. I mean, I tend to like, I'll start a piece with 2 patterns that are like slightly longer than each other and then just play off them. And as the train wreck happens, how do you respond with your next set of notes to those? That's where it gets interesting for me, or like starts to make my brain kind of excited. Yeah.
Hi, I'd like to say that first, it's really honored to meet you here. I've been following your music and your study for years. Anyway, you have researched noises in specific historical events before, right? And I can guess that like some noises could be used as propaganda way or political way. If so, if you found something like that, and what was the most making you freaked out? Would you introduce something?
Well, I guess like some of my like reading and writing led towards the use of like loudspeakers in like emergent fascism in the 30s, and like what led towards amplification and sonic power to charm and decapacitate mass crowds through political ends. And my kind of work stopped there as like its endpoint was obvious, the way the loudspeaker got picked up to like, decapacitate mass amounts of people in mass gatherings. And so there's obviously, going back to your question about control, it's like obvious. That's why I'm like so kind of weird, because I don't want to like, I have like a really ambivalent relationship with that. Like through sonic power, you can stop people from talking, but like what do you do with that? It's like a very confusing space to be in, because it's so loaded with power relations.
I have another question. Can I?
Sure.
Yeah. Most of the day, I used to just listen in my dark room. I just listen to your music, or just sad music, or classical music, and just destroying my ego, or crying. But also at the same time.
Thank you. It succeeded once.
Also at the same time, I go to club and just go crazy with grime, or some Rihanna. I'm crazy in Rihanna too. So like this. Also, Daniel Ropatin started making pop music, right? Yeah. So, are you listening to other kind of music we cannot expect?
Yeah, my music like started coming back from like raves and things like that, where I was like, okay, but like there's deeper music that could be played in like spaces. Like I was always interested in the chill out rooms I'd go into that was playing like psytrance or whatever, and I was just like, okay, but like, I just imagined making better music for that space, or being up at 6 a.m, and I was kind of like writing music for that, I would say. It doesn't really answer your question, but it's
You
true.
grew up listening to like shoegaze, a lot of shoegaze stuff, a lot of like European...
Like teenage years, for sure. I was like going into like, like faking driver's license IDs so I could like get into clubs to see like, I don't know, bands like Ride or My Bloody Valentine play. In Vancouver, that was like a huge thing if one of those bands came through town. It was like once every 6 months.
And then, like, I guess today, was reading some interviews. You listen a lot to Bones, this rapper.
I went through a phase, but
Oh,
I'd say,
you had a short phase with Bones.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he's someone that's like not really like, he's never been written about by Pitchfork, I believe, for example, but he like, his stuff's listened wide and he sells out big venues, and there's like a whole alternate, you know, world of musical dissemination that I still don't even understand. That's just like network driven, and it's really interesting that a lot of the kind of apparatuses aren't really dealing with or don't know how to deal with.
Are you, I mean, consciously not listening to stuff that's in the area that you work in?
I think no. I think like I go through phases where I think over listening to like contemporary music can hurt, you know, force too many questions, or like knowing too much will stop you from just having fun and expressing yourself, because in the end that's what it's about. But if you feel like there's almost a malaise of the archivist who knows like every form of experimental music in the last 40 years, they're constantly thwarted by themselves because they know some Italian from Bologna did a better version in 1976, and you're just like, you know, where do you go? You're like so lost. For me, I've like sometimes done the opposite, where I don't want to know certain aspects, like music history, just to help to create a space of play, or yeah.
There's a question behind you. Right there, yeah.
Thank you. Initially, I didn't have a question, but following Min's question, I now have two. The first one is, are you aware of Matthew Herbert's music?
Yes.
I like the albums One Pig and...
some of them, like, I'm definitely more, you know, I came out like being really interested in his dogma with respect to music production that I was kind of not fully on board with, like, but anyways.
So the question that came to mind was sound and control, because I actually forgot about it, but then I had a flashback to an image I have saved on my computer of an LARD, or long-range acoustic device that they used in Ferguson. Okay. And I was like, whoa, like they're already like we're already going down that fascist point. And then I bought this book from the 1960s or 70s called The Effects of Noise on Man by Carl D. Kreider, like on noise pollution.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I just wanted to know about contemporary control, or control through sound, like in mass populations, and like because Matthew Herbert also did the album of like a drone strike. Yeah, it was a 7-minute sound sample or something, but it was like a whole 40-minute thing.
Yeah, I mean, he's been like politically engaged in a really interesting way for a long time, and has like tackled a whole bunch of approaches, mostly by sampling like things on the fly and kind of building up constructions. They're really interesting. Like, he has like an overt politics that I've always been a bit more ambivalent about making it so explicit in terms of my work. But I feel that like obviously all these issues are totally legitimate, and that, you know, a lot of the tools of like audio control are used in such insidious ways now in terms of like urban policing. The way, you know, like Metallica was used in Guantanamo Bay, for example. Right. Like endless, you know, situations in which sound force, sound pressure is being used in really nefarious ends for control of populations and things like that.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
One of the things you mentioned in your dissertation was...
When I wrote my dissertation, I was like, I'm never going to talk about this. Just something I did on the side. It's like if you're a gardener, you know, and then you also like are like a logger or something.
But one of the chapters was all about like foghorns, basically. Yeah. So there's actually like totally beneficial uses to enormously loud, impressive sounds.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
that chapter on foghorn was about the mistake that if you can't see anything, because of storms where lighthouses don't work, you could use acoustic devices to save shipwrecks from happening. And that didn't really work because there's these zones of silence that are often created where sound doesn't propagate linearly to inform mariners that there's reefs all around. And so shipwrecks would keep happening despite increasing the power of these foghorns. And I kind of just like traced that that belief in making it more juiced up. It would be, you know, able to transmit farther distances, but it was kind of charting ultimately a failure in.
Interesting. There's another question.
I brought my own mic. I'm just kidding.
How did you wire it up?
No, I didn't. I wired it. Wow. Hi. Thank you for your work, first of all.
Pleasure.
It's very medicinal for me and a lot of people I think I know, you know. But you talked a little bit about knowing too much and teetering on that line and having like this, I don't know, I see this like, I fear for myself knowing too much like between academia and being primitive in approach to things and still maintaining that visceral kind of, I don't know how to word it, but how do you find balance, I guess, and like because of your study, you know, with actual sound and to be able to still accomplish something that you can connect to, you know, without going overboard?
Yeah, I think it's like a tough question. That's a question of balance for everyone. Has their own way of like creating sanity through like information onslaughts, through like constant, you know, forms of, I don't know, it's a tough one. Like I think for me, it's been like horse blinders at different points that just allow me to kind of focus. But, you know, like my studio is connected wirelessly and like writing is a problem sometimes when you're like iMessage just pops up. It's like you have to create these ways of just blocking it out. It's like a challenge. I don't know what the answer is, but it's like always been there and feels like it's accelerating. For some people, it's okay. They have like their chat window open and they're writing music. And for me, it doesn't really work because I'm not a good multitasker. I'm kind of like Neanderthal, just like focus on one thing at a time.
Cool. Thank you.
So in your reading, have you gotten to marine biology yet and like looked at dolphins and whales and echolocation? Because all that shit is really cool.
You can tell me about it though. No, I haven't.
Okay, I was curious.
Yeah.
Yeah, the way they communicate is insane in terms of sound.
A little bit. It's like long distance sonar types of forms of propagation.
And it's not uniform, like different depending on like the circles and stuff.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's great. I would love to learn more for sure.
Is there any more questions?
This is amazing. I expected to be asked about like plugins, and this is like not one. This is bless. Yeah, thank you.
Could you talk about while we're here together, your life setup maybe? How do you, the things you do in your studio, how do you
Yeah.
Talk about your plugins.
Live is a way of like guided improvisation. Like I break a lot of my pieces down into stems and I just kind of throw them into this blender that I have. We talked about Max MSP and I still use that as my main way of like performing. And I feed, you know, I run that all through a mixing desk and I have things like distortion pedals and I have a MIDI controller and I have a keyboard and I play a lot of synths into that blender, and then I have the mixer going back into my computer and I'm constantly resampling and I grab buffers and things like that, and it allows me to just like hit pause and just create like almost elasticity with time and like stretch things out, layer like white noise into feedback loops and things like that. So you can be guided by stems, but it also allows you to veer off into like a lot of insanity if you want. And sometimes it's confusing what's going on, but I have it, so it's kind of like I can wrestle it. It's like all these stray cats running around. And I got it so I can kind of just guide them towards something like hopefully musically interesting. Does that make sense?
Is it important to you to have that like lack of complete control in a way.
Yeah, I mean, you have to amuse yourself like as a sentient being, you know, that I don't want complete control. I want to be like challenged by my like computer feeding back or like seeming like it's going to crash or not knowing how that happened is a kind of like, you know, juice you need to drink to be nourished, you know? So yeah, I'd say so.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
I wanted to ask you, we've talked about, you were talking about like a figuration and like not really knowing what something is, like not being completely sure. And also like, I think it has to do with what you were just saying now about not having complete control yourself as the artist. But what do you like? I'm not quite sure how to formulate this, but do you feel as a listener, like, what do you like about that state of not knowing or not being quite sure, having an idea? What do you want to like provoke in your audiences in that respect? Like, what do you get from that?
I think that it's like it's effective, or like for me and maybe for some listeners to like not know possibly what's happening. So it's like if something sounds like a dolphin singing, for example, or it could actually be a cello, like to me that's an interesting compositional proposition, you know, that indiscernibility from what this actually is leads to like a kind of creative space of play in me as a composer and hopefully as a listener, that isn't so literal, isn't so pinned down, isn't so like data mined and transparent and deadening, you know what I mean? That's my own like heart singing to you right now. Yeah.
I'm reminded of a book by Nietzsche, like, about the thing that makes you really happy and the things that you really love, you have to mumble about. You can't really be articulate about it.
Yeah, it's like I'm literally on stage here muttering to you about like things I like because it doesn't always make sense, you know. It's kind of like because it's not a clear thesis. It's just a vague feeling that you're trying to like, you know, put words to.
You could almost say there's a fog. Sorry.
Yes, absolutely. I'm so sorry.
Sorry.
It's deeply
Apologize.
fog-inducing.
On that note, please, thank you very much, Tim Heckman.